Hey friends, it's Caitlin Dubin here with some exciting news for farmers. Good Agriculture is your go-to for farm business success. Good Agriculture handles everything from bookkeeping and financial analysis to marketing and websites to grant and loan applications, all at prices that you can afford. Give them a call if you need the back office tasks handled so you can have more time for the farm. They've helped countless farmers like you thrive and get profitable. Are you ready to grow? Visit goodagriculture.com/info or email hello@goodagriculture.com. Again, that's goodagriculture.com/info or head to the link in today's show notes. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Bridgette Readel. Bridgette is a farm kid extraordinaire, NDSU grad, and a passionate agronomist from Wishek, North Dakota, and now lives in Hunter. She is a very active FFA alumnus and past state officer. Bridgette and her husband Randy are both heavily involved in ag, where he is a dairy seed sales rep, and she is semi-retired from a 25-year career with Corteva Agriscience. They are the parents of 2 adult children who are mostly off the payroll. Although she graduated as a high school ag teacher, Bridgette is now busy teaching adults regarding production agriculture and truly enjoys sharing the bright and positive message of ag in North Dakota. Bridgette is the owner of Lilac Lane Media, a partner of the AgMafia and the ag director for WDAY Radio Flag Family Media. I am very excited for you to meet Bridgette and hear all about her story. And I have a special announcement to make as well. Bridgette has invited me to be on her Nooner chat over on Twitter, now known as X, on Friday, April 26, 2024. So be sure to head to the link in the show notes so you can find out more information about that. But I will be Bridgette's Nooner chat guest on Friday, April 26th at 11:30 a.m. Central. So be sure you tune in to that over on X, also known as Twitter. Before we get to Bridgette's interview, I want to say a quick and warm hello to our newest member over on Patreon. Annetta P. has joined us in supporting the stories of women in agriculture through Patreon for the Rural Woman Podcast. So a big hello to Annetta, and thank you so much for your support. If you, my friend, would like to support the stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast, you can join us over on Patreon, and all of the info for Patreon, the Nooner chat, and all of the good stuff you need to know about the Rural Woman Podcast you can find in the show notes. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Bridgette. Bridgette, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to get to dive into your story. I'm excited to hear the radio voice come back to me through my earpods over here.
I had no idea I had a radio voice until the last few years. Otherwise, I just thought I talked a lot. So this is pretty new to me.
I have to say, I have a podcast voice, and my husband says this to me too. He's like, talk to me like you're on the podcast, loud and clear, instead of mumbling under your breath.
That is solid husband and wife advice right there. Too many of us grew up with non-sound guard cabs, loud guns, and great stereos in cars. And so none of us can really hear great. So I think you're right. Use that voice.
Exactly. Project. Bridgette, for the folks who are unfamiliar with you, tell us your story. Give us your background, who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
So I am a lifelong farm kid extraordinaire. We grew up with dairy and grain, as well as beef animals. And I've learned that that's because my parents obviously were bad at making decisions, so they thought they'd just do everything. And when you do that growing up, you just learn to balance a lot of things all at one time. And I think that prepares us really well for adulthood. It gives us that foundation of how to be parents and full-time employees, and then do fun things like podcasts, etc. And we just get the opportunity to do a variety of things, just like farming might have looked like back at the time frame I was growing up in the 80s and into the 90s. I grew up in North Dakota. My brothers still operate our family farm. My version of farming was being ag chem rep for one of the large companies in the US. And then about 2 years ago, I decided to retire. I had had 25 years in, and my husband and I decided it was time to do something different. Kids were grown and out of the house. They're pretty much off the payroll now, which also, everyone, I hope you strive for that. This empty nesting, kids off the payroll thing, it's fabulous. And we decided that I could pursue some other dynamics in ag. So I now host an ag radio show. I spend plenty of time doing things on social media and promotion for various companies, and or just getting out in front of pretty much anything that has to do with rural mental health. And then additionally, I have the opportunity to get out in front of groups to speak. I'm actually headed to one of those events tonight. And sometimes those topics are anything from myth busting in ag to rural mental health to just simply sharing that story of others. And that's the most fun. All that time we grew up watching Disney movies, we really should have been asking each other what was going on and learning more from our grandparents. Disney movies were great, but these real life experiences are far, far better.
Absolutely. And there are so many nuggets in there that we're going to dive into. We are going to dissect your entire story. So you obviously grew up on the farm, loved the farm life. You were pretty active in FFA.
Very. And little known secret, I could say that I had this valiant idea that I was going to be an FFA because I wanted to do better for agriculture. No. I was dating a guy who was a crop judger, and he said, "You'll never be able to beat my top score." To which I replied, "Want to bet?" And then I did. So challenge was accepted. And all of those experiences, I know that it's not the same for everyone. It really depends on your teacher, just like your experience playing basketball depended on your coach or your hockey coach. For those of us who have been involved in ag, it can depend on your instructor as well. I was fortunate enough to be able to come out of there with skills like public speaking, networking, teamwork, and the desire to treat everything like an FFA event. So if I go to a farm show, it's like a big old reunion where I just get to visit with those people that I've known for years. Be optimistic in the things you do.
I grew up a city kid. I didn't know about agriculture, really anything around me. I lived 20 minutes away from the farm that I currently live now, and I just didn't know anything about agriculture. But I've always seen the folks my age that have come out of 4-H and just the life skills that are taught. And it's so funny to me, these life skills and the presentations and the public speaking and all of those things. I wish all city kids had access to that or knew about 4-H and all of those learning opportunities, because that's the stuff that we need to know now. I can't tell you the last time I used trigonometry for anything, but being able to present myself or any public speaking. Those would have been good skills to have now.
Oh, absolutely. Now, even though you were not a 4-H kid, but now you are actively engaged with farming, what do you think is probably the skill that has served you best?
That's a great question. Being open to something new has been something that's gotten to me to where I am today. Being open to an experience and seeing, trying things out, not being afraid to try things out, for sure.
I think that makes a marked difference. You kind of were that way as a kid, but to be that way as an adult is very impressive. Otherwise, too many folks, we've all formed our opinions and don't want to talk.
Very true. Very true. So way back when you were coming off of the farm, your initial plan was to be a teacher, an agriculture teacher. You mentioned you had a quite long career as not an agriculture teacher. So tell us about, the thought of going to school to become a teacher and what inspired you to shift to becoming an agronomist and pursuing a different career path.
When you have your first thoughts of going off to college, you're pretty positive that's what it's going to be, and you're never going to waver from it, right? I've made this decision. I am 18 years old. I am apparently a genius, and none of this will ever change. And then you get to college, and that networking kicks in, and you meet more and more folks, and your horizons expand as you start to learn about these other jobs that are available. One of the best things about being an ag teacher, especially going through the university system, I picked up a background of classes in everything from horticulture to crop and weed science to communications, education, the extension service, industrial welding. We were given such a broad background that we really became choice candidates for companies who wanted someone who was very trainable. And throughout my college career, I was doing internships, but I still needed to student teach to complete my degree. And while I was student teaching, one of those internships called me back. And that at the time was Dow Agrisciences. And they asked if I would be interested in going to work for them full time. Now, this is December of 1996. As a college student, you're being offered a new teaching job starting out at $18,000 a year. And then a company like Dow Agrisciences calls and says, we're going to start you at $36,000 a year. Now, I'm not a math major, but I got that one. And so I realized as well that I probably wasn't as good at teaching youth as I was at interacting with adults. And that became such a great spot for me. I spent my time in sales. I was also a technical agronomist where I spent time in the field evaluating new products, working on their federal labels with a whole team of folks, being able to train new hires and interns. I had over 70 new hires and interns through my 25 years with what eventually became Corteva. That means more to me than many of the other things I've ever done within a career. But after 25 years, I realized I can do something different. The first time I was offered a job description was as a sales rep coming into graduation. So as I was getting ready to graduate, and I had this opportunity to go work for Dow Agrisciences, they gave me a job description. And they said, here's what we want you to do. 15 years into that job, I said, I see a need. And so then I rewrote a job description and literally created a position for myself. After those 25 years with Corteva, I want to do something different. And what started out as a recommendation from a Twitter follower eventually became me once again writing my own job description to become an ag director for a local radio network that had never had one before. So if I can ever give someone my best advice, it's just try, just ask. We don't have to live by those definitions on paper of job descriptions, etc. The things that we can do differently often come best from ourselves when you see a need and you fix it. And it's been so much fun.
That's amazing. And, I think of the term, like, we've done it this way because so-and-so did it this way. My dad did it this way. His dad did it this way, and vice versa. It's the same as a job description on paper. It's like what you said, in my past real job, Similar situation happened. I had a piece of paper put in front of me of a job description of somebody who had been doing the job for the last 30 years. And then I'm put into this position once they retire. And I just look at this job description like, this doesn't work anymore. How can we make this work? You have to ask the question. And sometimes asking that question can be intimidating, but being able to do that and pave your own path, I think that's how we in agriculture are where we are today, because people ask the questions of how can we do things differently. We are in the world today, right? It's not specific to agriculture. If we're going to get philosophical here, like it is, people have asked the question of how do we do this better? How do we do this differently?
And I couldn't be more proud of those who challenge that to do it differently. When you look at some of the farms and ranches right around us, and they've made those changes to agritourism, direct marketing, changing up from we were always raising cattle, maybe now we're raising sheep. Whatever their niche is, they have figured out what makes the most sense for them. And it's not always what Grandpa did. And that's okay. Grandpa would probably be pretty proud of all of the changes that have been made. So we can't be afraid of asking those questions and taking on those challenges.
Right. And, the worst people can say is no. Mm-hmm. The worst you can do is, well, if that didn't work, maybe we'll try something different next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I decided to retire with the goal in mind that if I needed to come back to work in a corporate situation in 3 years, well, then I would do it. So far, so good.
Right.
See where it leads.
So share a bit about your experience in your career as a sales rep and technical agronomist. What were some of the challenges and what were some of the highlights? I want to do it for that job and then transition into what you're doing today.
Coming into Dow Agrisciences at the time I did in the late 90s, there weren't a lot of women. There weren't. And I spent probably the first 15 years being the only female in my district. Now, that comes with good and bad things. Rarely did I have an incident where someone was inappropriate, made me uncomfortable. That was very rare. Instead, I found that I was probably one of the guys because I learned very quickly that I wanted to know my business very well. I wanted to understand what my farmers needed, what my retail customers needed, because I wanted to be their resource. I wanted to be their teacher. And that gave me probably the best footing I could have, wanting to learn and wanting to teach that back out. I was very fortunate to have managers who said, would you like to mentor and take on new folks coming into the industry? Absolutely. There's that teacher part kicking in again. And I think highlights, it is easy to say, oh, I sold X amount of dollars. I launched X amount of products. But it was the people. It was the people that call me back and say, I want to tell you about another job opportunity that I have. Or I want to invite you to my wedding. Or just in the last couple of weeks, I work for a large company right now, and I would love to see you come and do some social media work for us. Those things come back to us and are very rewarding. I think the people that we help make the difference in all of our jobs. And yeah, I can put stats and figures to it, but it's a people business. We all still sell to somebody. I'm told that down the road, they won't need us as sales reps for chemical and fertilizer inputs anymore. Well, you're always going to need that resource. Well, you'll need somebody.
It's the human connection. I think that's the most valuable part out of all of it. And I've heard this time and time again early in my career in agriculture and working with business professionals who deal in agriculture. They think they're one of the luckiest industries because they get to work with farmers and ranchers and people in agriculture. And there's just something about them. They're charming.
They are. And, you will laugh. I could tell there was a changing of the tide, that we were getting a lot more women in the industry when suddenly I'd go to a farm show and there was a line at the ladies' room. That never used to happen. I had the whole place to myself. And now I went, there's all these other ladies coming in. This is going to be fun.
I want to dig more into that. And, you've had your whole life in agriculture and your professional career in agriculture. Can you share some insight into the role of women in agriculture and how that has changed during your professional career?
Well, just the number of us, the sheer number has increased, and that's been outstanding. I think the role of women has also changed in the fact that we bring that teaching skill with us, whether you understand that you do or not. When you're working with a group of farmers, you often are able to teach versus tell. And it's probably, that masculinity thing. Men don't want to be told what to do, but they'll listen to you as a female because you seem more like one of their teachers, right? Makes it a little bit easier. I could go on field calls to diagnose fields where I thought there was a problem. And oftentimes the receptivity of the farm family was way better with me than it was with one of my male counterparts, just based on that delivery. That made a difference. But I also think more women coming into the industry, we made it more of a family. When I first started, it was trade shows, and we were always going out for beer afterwards, and there were all these late night events. And because it was a little bit of an old boys club. Now, people, instead of doing that, they are bringing their families with for baseball games or for a supper meeting, something where they're involving everyone. And women, they aren't just the wife of a farmer. They are actively involved in making those decisions. What seed do we buy? Where do we get our equipment? They want to be treated as an equal on the farm. And I think that's incredibly important for all of us to remember. It's a partnership on every farm, whoever is there. Make sure that you include them all. I remember as an intern, I pulled up to a farmer's yard and I walked up to the shop, and without me saying a word, the guy says, "Oh, wife's in the house." I said, "Great. Is she going to go with me to go look at the field?" And he said, "What? I thought you were the Avon lady." I'm like, "No, I'm not." But that taught me to always ask the right questions and just remember everybody can be a part of that operation.
Right. And I feel like most women in agriculture have that story to tell of whether it's the Avon lady. I've answered the house phone and they say, "Can I talk to the farmer?" And I answer, you're speaking to them. And their response is, "No, I want the one who makes the decisions," and immediately got hung up on because, that's the worst opening line that I could even think of saying, right? And like you said, it's just treating people as people and equal partners in the operation. And I know, I've had so many conversations with women who might be lacking the confidence to call themselves a farmer, or to say that, if something happened, they wouldn't be able to make those decisions. And I always push back on that, because I think as women in agriculture, and really any woman in a male-dominated field, one of the things that we all have in common is the resilience and the know-how that whatever happens, we're probably going to figure it out. And the teaching instead of the telling, that sums it up perfectly. I'm not probably going to be able to tell you everything that you need to know, but I can teach you what I know and maybe what I don't know, and ask the right questions to get the answers that I need.
One of the things that I learned quickly, and the best from the group of men that I was in their district, don't take it personally. If a business decision is made, it was made for business. Don't hold that grudge. Don't walk around with that pain. Let it go. It was just business. And that served me incredibly well, not only in business, but in personal relationships too. It's just business. It's not always about you. And this may or may not be a good illustration to use, so I will leave that up to you. I had a coworker who got to one of his retail locations, and he pulled up and he saw the manager's pickup, and there were suitcases in the back of the pickup. And my coworker came walking on in and he said, "Wow, you got your suitcases in the pickup? Going on vacation? Where are you headed to?" The manager looked at him and said, "My wife is throwing me out. She just dropped all my things off in my vehicle." And right then he said, "You know what? Today's not a good day for us to do business. I think I'll come back another time." And so once again, understand that it's just business. Later, go check on that person because they're still a human being. Make sure they're okay. But above all, understand that timing. Like you said, when someone calls and, "Well, I want to talk to the farmer." Well, I am the farmer. Maybe that wasn't a good time to try to do business. Maybe I had to change that a little bit.
Right? Just, tweak that one a little bit. See if that works.
Exactly. Exactly.
I would love to know, like I'm a numbers nerd. I would love to know the stats on like the success rate that opening line has.
I don't think it's success is the word
Right.
you're looking for.
Oh, the hang up rate, maybe? I'm not
Right.
sure.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very different click rate, Caitlin. Very different click rate.
Exactly. Exactly. This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Talk to me about social media. We were chatting a little bit before we hit record here. You particularly are a Twitter gal, or X, if that's what we're supposed to call it now. I'm always going to call it Twitter. But talk to me, you mentioned before how someone on Twitter helped shape your job description or your new job description. Tell us how you've used social media to expand your network and just connect with so many amazing farmers.
I always thought that Twitter was some place where I would just lurk in the dark and watch. And then I realized I can't keep my mouth shut or my thumbs still because there were so many great conversations to be a part of. I am chatty. My dad would have told you that I was probably the child who said hello to the doctor in the delivery room. I've talked so long. And so for me, Twitter was just an extension of what I had done in FFA in high school. There's this whole world of other people out there that I can talk to and I can learn from them and I can ask them questions. And so Twitter just kept expanding for me. I am very fortunate that I had a Twitter follower who literally contacted the radio stations that I work for and said, if you would like someone to talk about ag, you should get her. She's positive. She has a good message when you ask her questions. She's not the National Enquirer of agriculture. So the stations called. They said, we'd love for you to do a once a week, 10-minute segment every Tuesday morning. Great. That'd be fun. 3 weeks later, they called and said, could you just work for us? It went well. So today I now host a 1-hour show Monday through Friday with 2 meteorologists called Weather and Ag in Focus. Additionally, I do morning spots with a variety of our hosts on different stations and just fill in other places wherever needed. But Twitter for me is that place where I can get the unfiltered truth. I think I'm pretty well known for trying to be positive on Twitter because I don't think I need to go there and be a keyboard warrior for anyone. What you see is what you get. I am actually this positive on most days. And I also, when I first saw Twitter Spaces come out, I thought, this is a great tool. How can I use this? I didn't have a podcast. Wasn't really sure I needed a podcast. So I just started every Friday at 11:30 hosting what is called the Nooner Chat because it's right before noon, at least in Central Time. Now that it's X, I have trouble saying I have a Nooner Chat on X. That seems very wrong. But I simply ask folks who are on the platform, join me. Let's pick a topic of conversation. It has been anywhere, at least in the recent days, of what's happened with a dicamba court ruling in the United States, rural mental health. We have one coming up about a farmer out of Nebraska is going to have a couple other guys on with him to talk about to till or not to till when it comes to their soil. We have had folks that simply tell their story. There's an agronomist out of Nebraska, and she shared how she goes and finds vintage online ads for farm equipment and farm inputs and where she finds them and people's reaction to them. The best way I can describe it is doing a Twitter space is essentially holding a party line phone call. I'm talking to somebody and everybody else is listening. They just ask questions from time to time. And it is great fun. Sometimes we get serious. A lot of times we tell great stories, but it's that Friday afternoon, just before you go to the weekend, sort of pick me up or fill me in on some information for many people.
That's amazing. And good for you for, looking. It's so overwhelming sometimes when social media platforms come out with all of these new things. Like they have like all of these extra things. It's like Instagram used to just be pictures and captions, and now it's stories and reels and all of these other things that you have to basically have a PhD in figuring out how to use these things. I don't dance, so I can't go on TikTok. Like all of these different things, right? So to have a tool and figure out how you're going to utilize it. And I love that reference, a party line. Like just a great way to connect with people.
And it is like a party line because someone will raise their hand and they'll want to jump into the conversation. Or I find myself not only using my phone, but my iPad to keep up because there are comments that are happening on Twitter underneath the announcement of the spaces. I get DMs from people asking questions. Oh, I'm in terrible cell service, but ask this question. I get text, I get snaps. It's like running a full service social media platform of your own in the background, but it is so great. Many people have connected. Depending on who I've had as a co-host, as I call them, they get new followers. They get to be part of all of these great conversations with folks in different parts of the world. It's been wonderful networking with so many people.
And, we also chatted before we hit record. Twitter's not my favorite place to hang out. Ag Twitter kind of scares me, only because of the negativity that has sometimes, came across. And I'm sure, is it called Ag X now? Or
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it is.
It's been a while. It's been a while. How have you found being a positive person on the internet versus maybe the not so positive folks?
So there's a couple things that I always keep in mind. One is if I have someone being negative, wanting to rip on me, the chances that they are doing it behind a fake name are pretty high. And I just don't engage. Literally, if you don't have the guts to tell me your real name, that tells me you aren't actually open to having a real discussion. You just want to be negative. And I don't need that in my life. Call me whatever name you want to. I can selectively choose to scroll on by and not engage. And that's okay. We don't have to get into every different conversation. I've also found that you make very, very good friends. And occasionally you'll have someone who steps in to, a thread, etc. And they want to be negative and they want to try to tear you down. And you don't even have to say a word because other people will leap to your defense and say, don't do that. When I started the Twitter spaces, one of the first things I told people right off the bat, we're not talking about politics because this was in the midst of COVID. And Lord knows we had so many different sides to the story. So we're not doing it. And I had one or two folks that would constantly try to get on and ask to speak. And then they would launch into their whole political tirade, which was completely off topic. So all I would do is mute them. I said, nope, we're not doing that here. And it stopped.
Honestly, I think setting boundaries around social media and how you use it and how you view it is basically the sustainability of being able to be on social media and to actually be social on it instead of just lurking. And
if someone called you at your house and tried to berate you over the phone and treat you that way, you wouldn't stand for it. You'd hang up on them. You can do that on social media too.
Them and that sales rep that called, you just hang up the phone on them.
Goodbye.
You mentioned that you've had your nooner chats. I love that name, nooner chats. And I agree with the X thing. That sounds like it should be on a completely different platform. But you've mentioned speaking about rural mental health in agriculture, and it's something that you are very passionate about. In your time as a professional woman in agriculture, tell me about the change of dynamics around how we speak about mental health when it comes to agriculture.
When I was a sales rep for Corteva, I wish I would have thought about asking the question more often, are you okay? I would get calls from customers or farmers, and sometimes they just needed to vent. And I would call that agronomic therapy. They really just wanted someone to listen. And I was okay with that. But it wasn't until here in the last couple of years that I realized what was really happening. They needed to vent because of this frustration, the anxiety, the concern that they had. And then I became friends with a lady who was part of Cattleman to Cattleman, which is a television show on RFD TV here in the States. And Kate sat down with me one day and said, I fear all those times that I talk to ranchers and they say I'm not okay. How many of them are out there who aren't even saying that? And we had a rash of farmer deaths here in North Dakota. Some were by suicide, some were accidents, but still we weren't always sure. And so Kate and I realized that one of the first steps we needed to do was to reach out to others. How can we help farmers and ranchers find resources? We're not professionals, but I bet we can find someone who is. And so she and I developed a space that we use at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association's national meeting called the Back Porch. And it's literally a booth with a couple of back porch rocking chairs on it. What we have for people are a list of resources, not just things like the suicide hotline, et cetera, but state by state, the agri-stress hotline, using things like National Farmers Mental Health Alliance out of Ontario, ruralminds.org from New York. And when people stop by our booth, or if they see us do a live on Instagram or share items on any of our social media platforms, we can deliver to them a place to go to get help, whether it's for themselves, a family member, maybe they want to just bring the first aid mental health responder training to their community. We will help them find that. And we've just decided that the more we can do to make sure others find that help, the better. I will listen. I will happily listen. But I'm not a professional. I'm only a first aid mental health responder. So that means I should help you find the right place to go. That's my job.
Absolutely. And I thank you for that. And I'm sure everyone that you've helped thanks you for that. I took first aid mental health training in my previous career. And when back in 2016, 2017, when I decided to pursue my life in agriculture, AKA get married and quit my job and learn how to drive a tractor, I didn't really ever kind of put it all together about mental health and agriculture. And it wasn't until I went to a conference and I saw my first presentation and kind of did a deeper dive into what does mental health look like in agriculture. And at the time, it looked pretty grim. There weren't a lot of people talking about it. But the few people that were, and that were vulnerable in sharing their stories, I had a lot of respect for. And that's kind of when I started sharing my own personal mental health journey. And I'm still open about it. And for some people, like you said, I'm not a professional. I have my little certificate on the wall, but that's it. I can share what I know and what I've been through, and I can share the resources that I know of. And I can hope that my story inspires somebody else to share their story, to be vulnerable and to help others know that it's okay to talk about this and it's okay not to be okay. And there are resources out there to help you. There are people out there to help you. And that you're not alone in this. I think that's also, at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing. Like, you're not alone in your stresses and you're not alone in your anxieties.
Such a big hurrah to all of you in Canada. You are miles ahead of us with things like the Do More Foundation, the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance. You have made that a priority within your country, not just for mental health, but also just rural health overall. And we need to get there. As those of us here in the US, we're not there yet. We're still sort of piecemealing it together. I hope we get there. And earlier when I said, I wish I'd have had the words, the example of that is when I speak to groups, I talk about my dad. And back in the late 80s, there was a severe drought in North Dakota. I was a teenager. I didn't know the words then because we didn't talk about mental health. If someone died by suicide, we didn't talk about that, right? That was taboo, which is such a shame. But during that drought, my dad decided to get out of dairy cows after 10 years of milking. Farmers are more attached to their dairy animals than any other breed of livestock, as far as I can see, or any other species. That's whom they adore. And when those cows left, My dad had this hole in his day. Yeah, he still had beef animals to feed. Yes, he still farmed. But I'm the oldest of four. And I noticed that my dad would do the laundry. And Dad did a lot of laundry for four kids. But he did that as his way of coping with the anxiety of no longer having those dairy cattle and the stress of filling that income gap on the farm. Had I known any of this then, I would have been able to talk about it reasonably and maybe understood my dad a little bit more. Now I realize what he was doing. And so when I speak to groups, I always ask, who's doing your laundry for you? Who is carrying that stress and that anxiety? And who should you be looking out for? Maybe it's even you.
And it's as simple, like you said, of asking somebody how they're doing. Are you okay? And you always have to hope that they're going to be honest with you. But even I feel like if you can get them talking about something else, that maybe, they can relieve their stress some other way by, griping about the price of grain or, any of these things, right? Like just to be able to talk and to connect with somebody. We live in such isolated areas and we live such a strange life, coming from the city, not knowing anything about farming and farmers. And when I tell my city friends now the things that we do, they just look at me like, who are you?
Fair enough.
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, I just think like that human connection that we can have in agriculture, there's not a lot of us in the grand scheme of things, but the more that we can help each other out, and just by simply asking, how are you doing? How can I help you? This is what worked for me. I think those are the key pieces that I think are going to continue the conversation about our mental health and our mental wellness.
And I hope that men will open up. They're the hardest for that to happen. And then I hope that women will take steps to help themselves, because they'll open up, but they won't seek help. They'll mother and care for everyone else first.
You can't help others if your cup is empty.
That's right. That's right.
Bridgette, what advice would you give specifically to women who are pursuing a career in agriculture and may not be sure what path to take or where to even start?
Oh, I love coaching new people. Okay, so first of all, go find things that you see as intriguing. What I mean by that is maybe you don't know what happens when someone is off to sell seed. Maybe you're unfamiliar with what it takes to sell equipment or work as a veterinarian technician. Well, go ask. Ask if you can job shadow for the day. It's only one day. Then, if it really intrigues you, start looking at internships. Internships should be thought of not only as an interview for you for the entire time frame, but for the company to interview with you. Maybe you find out that that's not the job that you thought it was, or the company that you want to work for. Ask tons of questions. Those in their jobs you're going to learn pretty quickly who's passionate and willing to share versus those who are maybe sort of on the fence, and that's maybe not where you want to go. When it comes time to building that resume, take it to someone who does recruiting within that industry. Students often go to their career centers at their universities where people haven't had to go find a job for 20 years. That doesn't work. Go talk to someone within the industry, show them your resume, make sure it's not general. That's the part where we have to put the statistics in. I walked X amount of acres this summer. I did recommendations for this many farmers. Give all of that information because it shows what you did. And it also shows that you paid enough attention to detail to document it. Get involved. Those organizations like 4-H, FFA, your agronomy club at college, your youth group, they get you to a point of teamwork and networking and connection. When I look back at all of those things that I did in college with organizations or even the high school organizations, I still see many of those folks all the time throughout my career. Now, first of all, we're stunned and amazed that we all have real jobs, and some of them are fairly high level. We never thought that was going to happen when we looked at our 14-year-old selves. But the reality is you will have those connections and you build them through the extracurriculars that you do or the internships that you take. Fun little game to play. I have had the same phone number since I took my very first full-time job in 1997. The connections and networking I have are broad. Want to take a guess how many phone numbers are currently in my contact list in my phone? I keep this fairly up to date.
Probably a lot.
Okay. We're going to look. 2,263. If there's someone you need, I can find them.
Right.
So those are the advice that I give folks. And then right back to how we started, Kaylin. Don't be afraid to challenge just a little bit. That job looks great. What if we did this? And it probably is going to turn out to be the right thing.
I have a lot of respect for the folks, particularly the women in the agriculture industry who have chosen to challenge what the status quo is and to see how far it's gotten them. And it's not always easy, is it?
No, not every day is easy. Some days you will get very frustrated, but the good days far outweigh the frustration days, I think.
Absolutely. Those ones overflow your cup. So on the days that they get a little bit more empty, you can scoop up whatever overflowed.
Exactly. And I mean, maybe I shouldn't encourage it, but sometimes a glass of wine just helps.
That's where I'm going after this. Oh, Bridgette, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. My last question for you, my famous last question, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
For me, it is absolutely the fact that I get to connect with so many other people in agriculture. I love hearing about everything from goat ranching to aquaculture to what it takes to be a custom combiner. I love that interaction with people and then being able to share that story with those who simply don't know. There are often times that I am asked to do some myth busting for consumers, meaning explain the things that happen in farming and why. So we start out by recommending that Yellowstone is not a documentary. The only reason I can answer those questions, such as, how long does it take for the steaks to grow back in the cow after you cut them out? Well, I can only answer those things because I've had those interactions with others all across agriculture in so many different ways. And that is the absolute highlight, is the people.
Absolutely. I agree with that. For the folks who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online?
At any point in time, you can find me on X, Twitter, at Readel. Everywhere else, I was a lot less creative, and I just used my name, Bridgette Readel, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook. I do have a TikTok account, but because I don't dance, much like you, I'm not very good at it. So, and then in addition, I use my own brand of LilacLaneMedia.com. And you can find me on my website if you have an interest in engaging further with other business ideas. I'm happy to help coach or just think of good ideas.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.